Okay, so I've had an incredible journey so far. I've been so very lucky to bump into some wonderful things, and I've been lucky enough to have a little bit of success. Very eclectic mix. Most recently, in the middle there, working as Transport Commissioner in Greater Manchester. You might have seen the yellow buses and the trams out there, the B network, that we started that off a few years ago, which is actually an incredible thing. If you look at the B, you see it's got little handlebars for antlers, because that was where it started. Before that, I started a bike company with some friends of mine. We ended up trading in 83 countries, which is brilliant to be involved in a business that you absolutely love and something you enjoy doing. But probably the genesis of all of it really was the photograph over on my left, the Olympic Games in 1992. About an hour before that picture was taken, well over a quarter of a century ago now. I'm amazed it's actually in colour. But before that, and I remember, it was a long time ago, but I remember it very clearly. It probably won't come as a surprise. And it was searing hot day. And I remember sitting on the start line, waiting for it to go. And I knew that this would be, if it came off, our first gold medal in cycling for 73 years. And I could see, this is how long ago it was, the little clock ticking down the last 5 seconds. It was actually painted on, just ticking the last few seconds. And at that moment, I was an unemployed carpenter with a wife, 2 kids, absolutely no money. And there were 62 million people watching the event live around the globe. And I didn't know how I was going to get my legs to go around. I'll double back to that in a moment. Because the reason that I am here standing before you today is because I am a friend of failure, a proud loser, a defender of defeat. Because despite the fact that none of them are listed on my Wikipedia page or anywhere else, I have lost 100 times more than I have ever won. Now, somewhere, well, I actually do remember it, where I was planning a lecture, not dissimilar to this, at home. And my wife was with me, and I was talking about the amount of failure. One of the kids walked past, and they said, "Later, loser," moving out of the door, as kids do. And as families do, it stuck. It became a family quirk, and that, to this day, is the Boardman family greeting, "Later, loser." And during lockdown, my grandchildren came to stay with us, and 2 years is a long time to indoctrinate kids. And they adopted this greeting themselves, which was problematic when they went back to school. And this is young Buddy. He went back, and his teacher, Mrs. Jones, and said, "Later, loser," at the end of the day. It wasn't warmly welcomed. And his mother found himself with the head of Holy Trinity Primary School trying to convince her that this was, in fact, a huge compliment. I'm not entirely sure that she managed that. But nevertheless, being a loser is an epithet that I've had for a long time. It's a position that I've championed since childhood. I was very ordinary all the way back to primary school, academically. I was physically very unremarkable. I was unable to triumph at anything. I found it even just getting a ribbon in the school's sack race was beyond me. They were invariably won by Brian Gibson, who was half boy, half pogo stick. But I'm not bitter. So how did that young man, a perfect example of ordinary, managed to get onto the top step of an Olympic podium, and I suppose ultimately standing here in front of you? And it was because of failure. And I know it's a bit of a weird way to frame this talk, and I'll grant you I did it for some dramatic effect. But it's a really important point, because it's not something that we focus on. Failure is not a focus, something we want to talk about. We want to talk about the other side of the coin. We want to wax lyrical about our successes, rewards, things going right. But they are two sides, of the same coin, absolutely inseparable. But from a very early age, we are taught to fear it. We are taught that ticks are good and crosses are bad. You are taught this from a very early age, almost formative years. And no wonder we have a visceral hatred of losing. It hurts. Ask any fan of Tranmere Rovers. They know this to their core. Yet is our biggest moment of learning comes from this space. So if we don't work out how to manage it, how to work out how to value it, then we will inevitably veer towards trying to avoid it and deprive ourselves of the opportunity to win. So I've done a little bit of research. I'm sure we've all read about lots of famous people in the past. We've got Steve Jobs, we've got Edison, we've got Ford. They've all got stories about failure in their past. Two of my very favorites are Mark Chavanaz and Al Fielding back in the 60s, who invented a textured wallpaper, completely bombed. So they went back and reinvented it, and they went, this is our housing insulation. Totally failed. And then they went back and reinvented it as protective packaging, and bingo, it worked. IBM bit, and it became how they shipped their newly launched computers, and bubble wrap was born. But before that, they first had to have a way to cope with the prospect of failure, the emotional impact of that. Skills, if you like, to emotionally manage and to then leverage loss. And I think they are skills. I think they're techniques. I think it's learnable. I think they're methodologies that we can find and use. And I know they are because I've done it. So I wanted to tell you about two wonderful people who gave me the tools to do some amazing stuff, be around and be involved with some incredible people. So I mentioned my childhood very briefly, and I was not great at school, didn't fit in, got bullied, didn't have a fun time at all. But luckily I had a great family, and they had other activities away from that. They were a cycling family, and eventually at the age 13, they let me ride a bicycle race. And so I went and rode just outside of Chester, not too far from here. And sure enough, when the results were posted on the lamppost on a piece of A4 paper at the end of the evening, my name was near the bottom, which was okay for me. This is a place I'm very comfortable with. It's where I'd always been. I went back the next week and went a little bit further up. And after a few weeks, I found myself being first schoolboy. I think there was 3 of us there, and I was first schoolboy. And this was something that I have never experienced before, winning. It was an amazing feeling, and I liked it because it gave me something that I desperately needed. It gave me some self-respect, a sense of value. Now, self-worth that comes from winning is not a healthy place to be. It put me on an emotional roller coaster. So whilst winning was wonderful, losing was suddenly a really intensely miserable experience that I was really struggling to cope with. Luckily for me, I met a young, fresh-faced sports scientist, this guy. It was in my world, the world of sport, for a wholly different reason, because it contained fascinating puzzles. And his name was Peter Keane, and it ended up being a 15-year relationship. And Peter went on to do amazing things. He was responsible, large part, for the London 2012 bid, things like that. He's an incredible guy. But he had a passion, not for winning, but for understanding and learning. Finishing first, bit of a pleasant side effect. Now, his fascination was with being better, not the best. And I choose my words carefully. They're very different things. And he introduced a scared teenager to a philosophy, a simple process, one that saved me and I use to this day for everything from preparing a speech to overseeing the spending of billions of pounds. And it goes like this. We had an evidence-based goal. And the evidence is what gave us the motivation, belief that there was a prize at the end of this. And it could be a single training session or a whole year's strategy. And then we go out and execute it, experience it, and measure it. We measured everything we possibly could. I didn't realize until we tried that you can codify feelings, measured everything. And then the most important bit is that we ripped it apart, pulled it apart. What do we expect to happen? What actually happened? Wow, there's a gap. What caused the gap? What can we do differently? And we had a new evidence and a new plan. There is nothing that you cannot apply that 4-step process to. And it gave me a fascination with exploring. It gave me joy in the journey rather than just the one specific destination. And it enabled me to appreciate the tremendous value in not getting the result that I thought I would, and that winning cannot yield. Incidentally, this picture here, Peter, he was quite a perverse individual in some ways, where we were going to attempt a world record in Bordeaux in the summer. It was going to be incredibly hot, so Peter thought we should rehearse this whole 1-hour record attempt in his laboratory at 36 degrees just to see what would happen. You might not be able to see, there's a little wire there. I'm not going to tell you where it was going. It was measuring my internal body temperature, but suffice to say, it's the reason I got an MBE for services to sports science. So Peter and I kept moving forward for about 5 years, and just a little bit further forward, evolving, learning, discovering new things, until eventually we ended up on the steps of the Montjuïc Stadium in Barcelona. I suppose you could call it our dream destination. Now the paradigm had shifted. There was no way I could frame this as learning. This was it. This was my 15 minutes. And as I spoke to you earlier, I described the sensation of being in that moment. And I was just about struggling to hold it together. Luckily for me, en route, we had bumped into this guy. So sports psychology or psychology had never really been near sport in the late 80s, early 90s. But we had bumped into this gentleman. It's the only picture I could find of him actually anywhere, which is why it's quite poor. John Sire, very quiet individual, worked with Tottenham Hotspur, worked with Ford Motor Companies, and for some reason he got interested in sport. We'd become friends. And so about an hour before the final took place, I'd asked John if he would just hang out with me, and he said, yeah, sure. So we were underneath the track in the mechanics room trying to just keep out of the heat. And I was sitting on the edge of a massage table, swinging my legs, just waiting. And John said, how do you feel? Because that's what psychologists do. How do you feel? I said, John, I feel absolutely terrible. I would rather be anywhere than here right now. I just want it to be over. And he said, yeah, that's okay. I said, what? He said, yeah, this is a big deal. I said, hang on, you're supposed to be making me feel better here. He said, no, elation and despair are two sides of the same coin. If you want the big win, you've got to risk the big low. Tell me what it is that's making you feel like that. So John, this is it. This is the moment. What happens if I wobble out the gate? What happens if the other guy's faster than me? What happens if I puncture? What happens if I go out too fast and blow up? And I whittled on for probably about 45 seconds before mumbling, well, I'll just do the best that I can. And he looked at me and smiled, which is the other thing that psychologists do. So an hour later, I sat on the track and I watched those last few seconds tick down. And I thought, and you had to excuse me, it was a real moment. I thought, fuck it. I am just going to be the best that I can be. And when I've crossed the line, I'll see where it got me. John had taught me to accept the fact that some things are beyond my control. That is not where my focus should be. And he taught me that attitude is a choice. It is not productive, as we've heard today already, to try to stop being scared. It is productive to recognize and identify why you were scared and where your focus should be, to accept the possibility of failure, and then with your eyes wide open, choose to do it anyway. And that is liberating. It is a relief. It's authentic. and it's exciting. Losing is the essential traveling companion of winners. Reframing it and learning how to maximize it, they are two powerful tools, but put them together, it is a superpower. My name is Boardman. I am 56 years old, and I am still a loser.